Welcome to another edition of Just a Chat with Pastor Bruce Engelman. Today we have on, I have a brother in heaven. But other than my brother in heaven who died like an hour after he was born, back in the day they didn't name the kids, but I do have a brother in heaven. But other than him, my brother Robert is in Cleveland, Ohio, very successful businessman. And this is my brother of a different mother, my adopted brother, Dr. Scott Gray, pastors a mega church in Durham, North Carolina. Brother Scott, good to have you today.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
How do you feel about being on TV?
This is impressive, yeah.
First time on television? Or?
No, but I'll take it.
Yes. Well, that's right. When they arranged you were on TV.
That's
yes.
correct.
I'm kidding. Brother Scott and I are not good for each other because we cut up too much. But seriously, we are good for each other because iron sharpeneth iron.
Correct. And if there
Plus,
is,
you keep me in line too.
I do my best.
Yes.
But the Lord separated us and put me on the East Coast and Pastor Engelman in Texas. But it's good to be here.
Amen. We also have Gary Mann, another compatriot in crime, here in the studios. And we're going to be talking to him later for another episode. We're going to bury it on Sunday morning when nobody's watching TV. But no, just kidding, Gary. Just kidding. I got to carry on Don Rickles' legacy. I'm convinced the guy was saved. But I used to call Brother Hiles the Don Rickles of the pulpit because he was always insulting people. And he's the only guy who could get away with it.
And he got away with it often, yes.
Yeah. Remember you and I went to his funeral?
Yes.
That was one of the saddest occasions. What are you laughing for?
I didn't know if you were talking about Don Rickles or Pastor Hiles.
Okay, I keep telling my wife, my lovely, wonderful wife Cassandra, it's Rickles, not Wrinkles. It's Rickles.
She told me to say Wrinkles.
Oh, did she really?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then it's okay. But no, Dr. Hiles, my preacher and your dear friend. He was never actually your pastor, was he?
No.
Technically.
No, sir.
But just a real good friend. And you used to chauffeur him around. Pastor of the world's largest church we're talking about, world's largest Sunday school. Didn't you get to chauffeur him around?
Yeah, he came to Longview where Dad pastored. My brother pastors now.
Tell the people about Longview Baptist Temple for just a second and get back to Brother Hiles. Yeah.
Longview Baptist Temple is where I grew up. We moved there when I was 8 years of age. I moved away when I was 32. And so I spent most of my life there and thoroughly enjoyed it, loved it. And my brother, Dr. Bob Gray Jr., pastors it now, doing a great job.
He is.
And my dad pastored it for right at 30 years. And the Lord used him in a great way.
Your dad was just on this show, and he and the Bradys, the famous gospel singers, have the two highest rated shows with most viewers and hits so far.
We'll break that. It'll be good.
Yeah, let's break that. No offense, Dr. Gray. And he also preached in our church in December, did a wonderful job.
Amen.
Yeah, your brother Bob is really doing great bringing that church. When a pastor leaves, it's hard. And even under the best of circumstances, you're going to lose families.
Sure.
And so when your father retired because of your mom's health, and we have prayed for her every day, nearly every day for many years, there was a transition. And especially your dad was a very charismatic, and I don't mean that in terms of a capital C, but a small c, very charismatic, excellent pulpiteer, very popular across America. That's even harder following a legend, even if it's your son.
Yeah.
But Brother Bob has done a good job bringing the church back, hasn't he?
Done tremendous, yeah. Bob's a very personal soul winner, obviously, like Dad. He taught all of us that. Bob's a great pastor, loves his people love him, and he's done very well to pick up the baton and run with it, and doing well.
We're talking with Dr. Scott Gray, pastors a great church in Durham, North Carolina, Liberty Baptist, right?
Yes, sir.
And my good friend was there. In fact, we actually took some trips together. Dr. Jack Cox.
Yes, sir.
And how long was Dr. Cox there?
Preacher Cox pastored there for 30 years.
Wow.
And the church started in 1922 from a tent meeting there in Durham. And then a church was birthed out of that. Some folks were saved, baptized, and so it was started the right way.
Amen.
And has been through some great pastors, but Preacher Cox stayed there the longest term of all the men that were there. And like I said, for 30 years. I was going I never thought I'd pastor. I was in full-time evangelism, loved it. And but the Lord gave me peace about pastoring. And it was one of those things where, Lord, you're going to have to open the door, because I'm not going to knock or make phone calls. And when I was talking with my pastor, the ministry I was serving at, and let him know what God was doing in my heart, and he said, well, where are you going? And then when you come back, we'll talk. And I said, well, next week I'm preaching a revival in Durham, North Carolina at Liberty Baptist Church. And then I'll come back and we'll talk. And so I went to preach a revival, not knowing that Pastor Cox had just decided and through prayer that it was time for him to retire. And God used that week. I had the whole family with me. It was one of those events where when you look back on it, God put all the pieces together. It's amazing. You know, God knows what he's doing. And I don't know why that shocks us, but every time I watch him do things, it's phenomenal. And so, been there, it'll be 4 years this June.
Have you? It doesn't seem like 4.
Yeah, it's gone by very, very quick.
Years.
Greatest people in the world, love them to death.
You can't beat North Carolinian people. You can't beat Tar Heels.
No, they're the best.
Other, well, Texans. But I've often said if I couldn't live in Texas, there's only 2 other states I would live in: North Carolina or Tennessee, because the people are just so great in North Carolina.
Yep.
You mentioned it. Perfect segue, because that was going to be my next question. You were an evangelist for years, very successful evangelist, I might add, a local church evangelist, and a soul-winning evangelist, itinerant evangelist, but also a nationally acclaimed youth speaker. What is the major difference between being an evangelist full-time and pastoring now a large church?
Well, you know, when I went there, I remember meeting with the staff, and one of the men asked that question and said, "I've heard you preach as an evangelist, but can you feed my family 3 times a week?"
Wow.
And I said, "Man, that's a great question."
You said, "No, I can't." Great question, but no, I can't. We'll see you later, guys.
But, you know, it really, the Lord had burdened my heart to help grow some people and to help mentor and to help be an under shepherd. And again, men, you know, you mentioned Evangelist Gary Mann's here, you're here, and both of you know what it means when God just does it to your heart.
Oh, yeah.
When he fits a man for a ministry.
Yeah.
And when he does that, you can't explain it. It's just God. I think he'll give you the wisdom you need. He'll give you the tools you need. If you keep your walk with God fresh, keep yourself clean, love your wife, your family to death, and just try to do right. Yeah. Then God will take care of everything else. Right. But I found myself, I love to travel, I love to preach, I love to help churches in any way that I can. But I'll tell you, my heart is with those people, and my heart is to love them and protect them, and I love feeding them every week. I love spiritually preparing messages, and I find myself in the back room for hours, and have a trail that I walk every week and pray, and just, I'm not a spiritual guy, don't get that wrong. But
he really is.
I try.
No, he is.
Cut that out. But no, I love taking that book and feeding people to where they can walk away going, I think I learned something today. And as preachers, we critique ourselves more than anybody.
Oh,
we'll
really
get back
do.
after we're done.
Yeah,
That was
really
horrible. What was I thinking?
Yeah.
But to hear somebody walk up and say, I never saw that before, or that helped me, or that was a little rough, but I needed that.
Yeah.
There's something about that.
Yeah.
To watch new converts grow, to watch families come back together. So.
And you miss that as an evangelist, because you go in, you do a series of meetings or a revival or a crusade.
And a true evangelist, you put your heart in everything you do.
Yeah.
But when you have to lead those people after spending 3 or 4 or 5 days.
It's not easy to do it either.
No. I've had many a times where I'm driving off a parking lot, looking at that church sign in my mirror going, man, I love those people.
Yeah.
And because, again, when you're doing your work, that's your job, the work of an evangelist. When you're doing that work, your heart's in it, your fingerprint's there, and it means something to you.
Yeah. I've been an evangelist twice and a pastor 3 times, and you're so right. It was so hard to leave those people.
Yeah.
And you may not see them for another year. You may never see
Correct.
some of them again until you get to heaven.
Correct.
And you never know the impact you leave.
But isn't that the great thing? We're working for the Lord.
Yeah.
So we don't have to know everything that happens now.
No.
And we don't have to have all the results now. It's when you get to heaven and you're going to see a lot of people that you influenced, didn't even realize you influenced.
Dr. Jim, exactly. And that's why I tell pastors, boy, a lot of pastors have been committing suicide and getting depressed, leaving their wives, getting divorced, leaving the ministry because they're discouraged. Don't get discouraged, pastor, or missionary or evangelist, because you don't know how much good that you're really doing. It's like that movie Wonderful Life. George Bailey thought he was a failure. Here he had saved the whole town and didn't even know it. And that was a Christian movie you recommended years ago. But no, I one quick anecdote. I'm going to turn it back to you. This is a good segue. That's my favorite word today, segue. It's a broadcasting term from the French, which means to transition from one subject to another in the radio or television genres. I had spoken to 4 or 5 high schools in South Jersey for Dr. Jim Doster, our mutual friend. with the Athlete Outreach International ministry, which emanates out of this church, Triumph Baptist Fort Worth. Prior to that, Chicago, and then your dad's church. And I got into Collingswood High School, one of about 5 high schools I had spoken to football teams. I mean, Jim had me going from church to church to church to church. I didn't even know what I was saying after, where am I? What state am I in? I knew I was in a state of confusion, but I mean, he had me like in one day 3 schools, speaking of 3 different football teams. So I went into Collingswood High School, which is just across the river from Philadelphia.
Okay.
The home of the great Presbyterian minister Carl McIntyre. He started the fundamental Presbyterian movement, Bible Presbyterian movement. And I spoke at that high school. Well, they went out and won their game. But in fact, I traveled with them to the game the next day. And they were playing Paulsboro, the #1 rated team in New Jersey. Long story short, a year later, I'm back in Jim Doster's church. He says, hey, pick up the phone and get a hold of the coach and see if he wants to come back and speak to the team. The coach answers the phone, Brother Scott, and he says, Bruce Engelman, did you know what happened at our high school after you left? Now, I preached for 55 minutes.
Right.
And they said, do you mind if we bring in the soccer team and the fall cross country team and the tennis team and some of the baseball spring players and some of the wrestlers? I said, no, man, the more the merrier. So we not only had the whole varsity football team, but we had a smattering of different athletic teams represented there. He said, after you left, the school started a Fellowship of Christian Athletes.
Wow.
A chapter. He said, after you left, kids got involved in Bible study here in the school. We saw a decrease in drugs and alcohol. There was a coach from one of the other sports that was on the verge of divorce. He and his wife went back to church.
Amen.
Their marriage is
Amen.
still intact. Do you remember I asked if the fall cross country coach could come in with his 10-year-old boy? I said, oh yeah, I remember that. And you said, no problem. He was the only adolescent in there. Everybody else was an older teenager. Varsity letterman at Collingswood High in New Jersey. And he said he outlined your sermon on attitude and went home and put it on computer paper and literally wallpapered his bedroom at home and said it changed his life. 10-year-old kid. All of this happened in one high school.
Wow.
With a 55-minute speech, and I didn't even know about it for a whole year.
Yep.
And I'm sure Gary Mann could share similar stories. So, the devil likes to get us discouraged as evangelists and pastors and missionaries, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think it's one extreme to the other. You either get discouraged, wondering if anything good's happening. But if you saw all those stories and knew all that, we'd be so full of pride, God couldn't even work with us.
Yeah, that's
And James 4, he resists that. So,
yeah.
But we're one extreme to the other, I think.
Speaking of public high school outreach, you helped me hand in hand in Longview at your dad's church, Longview Baptist Temple. You've been with me. We've spoken to many football teams together. And then you kind of took it to a new level. At one time, it was America's largest church, world's largest Sunday school. And tell us 1 or 2 stories that you did up in Chicagoland and that you're doing now in Durham, reaching these public high school students, which I've said for 40 years is the unforgotten mission field in America.
Right. I do believe that. And I encourage our people, let me just say before that, I encourage our people at our church every time you drive by a public school to take a second or two and pray for the teachers, pray for the students. There's a lot of young people that go in there that are believers, and they need strength, they need encouragement to reach their friends, get them in church.
That's good.
And then we have a lot of good teachers that work in the public school system, and they give of their lives, and they really want to make a difference, and we should really lift them up in prayer and do our part. Anyway, the program that we had, Responsibility USA, went into the public school identical to what you had, and just partnered with that. And a friend of mine, Brother Jason Gibbons, he tried out for the Harlem Globetrotters. He plays for a D-League team for the Boston Celtics, and has performed 3 times at the NBA All-Star Games. And so he's just a great draw for the young people in the public schools. So he goes in and does a basketball presentation for the kids. They love it. I watched him in elementary, middle school, and I even asked him, I was a critic, and I was a Thomas, and said, you're going to have to prove to me you can do this in a high school because those boys can play ball. But I watched him in 31 schools in 1 week time, and we packed out the gym in every one of those and spoke to just
31 schools?
31 schools
in 1 week?
In 1 week.
And that was in Northwest Indiana?
Correct.
Chicagoland, Calumet region, that area.
And then on Friday nights, we had a big rally. We rented out the Civic Center, and over 2,700 people came that night,
Hmm.
and 700 folks trusted Christ. Over 700 that stood that said they trusted Christ, and so we're trying to do that. I brought him in last November, into our area. Just hit a few schools as a trial run, and he has a gift that God's given him to reach young people, and with his talent with basketball, and he does well. And then he encourages them through his life, some things he struggled with, and teaches about drugs and bullying and all things that young people face and are struggling with. And so then we do our best to get the gospel to them.
Fantastic. You had the one.
But you started it, and I appreciate the
you're very
influence
kind.
there.
You're very kind. But
And he asked me to say that too.
You'll get the $5 later, and if you buy me a Dunkin' Donut coffee. But you're doing it in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about my son Justin doing it, nine public high schools in
Right.
Southern California. And yet I meet pastors from time to time.
Can't do it in my state. Too
Right,
liberal.
right.
Too politically correct.
Yep.
They don't want it to be done, do they?
Correct. I even heard that up there in Indiana.
Oh,
and
really?
Chicago. Oh, yes. You can do it down south, is what it was said
Oh,
there.
uh-huh.
But you're on the wrong side of the line.
Yeah.
And then after that week of, I don't know, God showing up, it's amazing when God does it.
Yeah.
It's no man. Nobody did it. It was God.
Yeah.
And when he does, it even shocks me. I still walk away going, that was good. But it showed other people that, oh, okay, it's not a Southern thing. It's not an
Right.
Eastern or Western thing. It's a God thing.
It's a God thing.
And when God works things out, he takes the weak things to make the strong. Wonder what happened.
One time I was in Carl McIntyre's home in Collingswood. He was 93, still preaching the gospel, pioneer of the old time religion. And he said, I understand you got into Collingswood High School. It was right across the street from his mansion. And I said, yes, sir, I preach their football team. He said, how did you get in there? I've been trying for 60 years to get into that school and preach the gospel. So I told him how we did it with Athlete Outreach. He goes, son, that's a slick outfit you got. But no, it wasn't the slickness that got you in,
Yeah,
was it?
yeah.
I said, no, sir. He said, no, it was the power of God. You know how those old timers talk. Power of God, Bob Jones, J.
Yep,
Frank Norris.
yep.
And it is. It's the power of God.
Exactly
And
right.
I had the Griffith football team on the platform at Pastor School one time with Dr. Jack Hiles. And when I was done, and we did the whole presentation. He had me do the whole 55-minute sermon on attitude. And he got up and mounted the pulpit, and he looked out at the pastors, and he said, Bruce Engelman, the reason why he's doing this is he hasn't read your book back home, Why It Can't Be Done. And then he said, by the way, he said, you have just witnessed an artist at work. That's why I love Brother Howe so much.
Yeah,
He bragged on
yeah.
me. He said, you have witnessed an artist at work. Gary, the artist was me. And then he said this, wow, there are only two men on the face of God's green earth that could pull this off that you just witnessed in front of the Griffith football team here at Pastor School. Bruce Engelman is one, and humility keeps me from mentioning the other. Is that Dr.
That's
Hiles?
good. That's
yeah,
him.
yeah.
That's
But it's
him.
fun. Isn't it fun to go to the public school?
Oh, yeah.
In fact, the Midwest, Indiana and Ohio, the two that were supposedly the worst were the easiest to get into.
Yeah.
And then I had, well, hold your thought. I had a pastor tell me who played in the NFL, by the way. He was a star in the NFL. And he pastored a good independent Baptist church outside of Philly. He said, well, you can't do it in Pennsylvania. You can't do it. Pennsylvania's my home state. Well, when the number one team in the nation, USA Today in the nation, Mannheim Central called me in to speak to their team.
Yeah.
We proved we can even do
Yeah.
it in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. It's amazing to watch how hungry kids are.
Yeah.
And when you go in there, and they're just wanting help, they're just needing guidance. And it doesn't matter what age, it's like anybody. Some folks want it, some don't. But the ones that want it, and you watch their lives grow, and you watch them center it, put Christ in the middle of it all, it's a joy.
It's exciting and a joy.
It is.
And have you noticed there are exceptions on both sides?
Mm-hmm.
But have you not noticed, and I've noticed it in 37 and a half years of doing athlete outreach, that the public high school kids are usually a lot more respectful
Yeah.
than a lot of the Christian schools I speak in?
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yeah. What do you think?
Love
Why do
it.
you think that is?
The newness of life. It takes character to be a Christian. And so that's why I have to work, make sure to keep that fresh,
Yeah.
keep my walk with God fresh and right and clean, and keep our love for God real.
Amen. Well, we're down to our last minute. We could talk for hours.
Mm-hmm.
Here we're worried about what we're going to talk about, right? My guest has been Dr. Scott Gray, the senior pastor of Liberty Baptist Church in Durham, North Carolina. For many years, one of the finest youth evangelists in America. We have less than a minute. Is there a thought you'd like to share? Somebody you'd like to say hello to back home? a little corny, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Or just a final thought for the Lord and our viewing audience.
I would just encourage everyone, find somebody today that you can encourage, find somebody today you can give the gospel to. If you're a believer, then find a way to share that faith and tell somebody what Christ did for you. And it will change your world. I promise you that.
Amen.
Thank you,
Brother,
my
good
friend.
to have you on, my brother.
Enjoyed it.
We've been talking with Dr. Scott Gray. We're going to have him back again sometime till another edition of Just a Chat with Pastor Bruce Engelman. Remember this, Jesus is coming back real soon. Got that from Jack Van Impe's show.